Emma had always been the kind of person who felt like she didn't belong. Growing up in a small, quiet village surrounded by wide fields and dense forests, she never really fit in with the others. She was often overlooked and unnoticed by the people around her. Emma wasn't an outgoing person, and she wasn't one of those kids who always knew how to make friends. She wasn't bad-looking, but she was different in a way that others seemed to find hard to accept. Her village, a place where everyone knew everyone, had a certain set of unspoken rules about what was considered normal. The people who lived there had a way of looking at things, and the way you looked was very important. If you weren't like everyone else, it was hard to fit in. Emma had always struggled with her appearance. She was chubby, and despite how much she tried to change, her body just didn't match the ideals of beauty that were so important in her small community. In a world where skinny and slim were praised, she often felt like an outsider. It wasn't just her body that made her feel different, though. Emma was quiet, shy, and introspective, always keeping to herself while most of the other kids in her village were more outgoing and active. As a child, she would watch the other girls at school, laughing and talking with their friends, their thin figures swaying as they skipped down the road. They always seemed so perfect. And then there was Emma, the too chubby girl who always felt awkward in every situation. She tried to smile and fit in, but the other kids had already made their judgment. Some of the boys would tease her, calling her names that made her cheeks burn with embarrassment. Some girls would whisper behind her back or glance at her with a look of disapproval. The cruelty was sometimes subtle, but Emma felt it every single day. At home, things were a little better, but not by much. Her father, a hard-working farmer, had a tough time expressing his feelings. He worked from sunrise to sunset, and the few words he spoke were often about the farm and the work that needed to be done. He had no time to talk about how Emma was feeling or to offer words of encouragement. He wasn't unkind, but he was distant, and Emma felt that distance more than anything. It was as though her father was a man who had lost the ability to connect emotionally with anyone, including his own daughter. Without her mother, who had passed away when Emma was still very young, Emma had no one to turn to when the world felt too big and too cold. Her mother had been the one to hold her when she was scared, to wipe away her tears when the teasing at school got too much to handle. But without her, Emma was left to navigate a world that felt overwhelmingly harsh. So Emma spent a lot of time alone. Whenever the bullying at school became too much, she would retreat into her own thoughts. She would escape into the fields and forests that surrounded her village. Nature, with its endless sky and vast spaces, offered her a sense of peace that she couldn't find anywhere else. It was in these wide-open areas where Emma felt like she could breathe freely, away from the judgment and whispers of the world around her. Every weekend, Emma would go for long walks by herself. She found comfort in the rhythm of her feet, crunching on the dry grass and the soft breeze on her face. The forests, with their tall, towering trees, were her sanctuary. No one could judge her out there. She didn't have to worry about being called names or feeling out of place. In the woods, it was just her and the sounds of nature. She would watch the birds flit from tree to tree, the squirrels scampering up trunks and the occasional deer grazing peacefully in the distance. Everything in the forest seemed to belong, unlike the world she faced at school and at home. The further she ventured into the forest, the more she found herself feeling at peace. She would find a quiet spot near a stream and sit there for hours, listening to the gentle flow of the water and watching the sunlight dapple through the leaves. Sometimes she would bring a notebook with her and try to write her feelings down, but most of the time the words wouldn't come. She couldn't put the loneliness she felt into words. Instead, she would just sit there and let the silence of the forest wash over her, hoping that it would somehow ease the ache inside her heart. It was during one of these long walks that Emma's life would take an unexpected turn. She had wandered deeper into the forest than she had ever gone before. The air was cool and the sky was overcast, the kind of gray sky that seemed to suck the color out of everything. Emma didn't mind it. She didn't have any particular destination in mind. She was just walking, following the narrow trail that led her further and further from the village. She had always been careful about where she went, never straying too far from the familiar paths. But on this day, something felt different. The further she walked, the more unfamiliar everything began to look. She hadn't realized how far she had gone, and now the forest around her seemed strange and unwelcoming. The trees were dense, blocking out most of the sunlight, and the trail was barely visible beneath the thick layer of fallen leaves. For a moment she stopped and turned around, expecting to see the village in the distance, but there was nothing but the endless trees. A knot of worry began to form in her stomach. She had ventured too far this time. Emma hesitated, looking back and forth, trying to find a way out. But every direction looked the same. The panic began to rise in her chest. She had no idea where she was. The path that had been so clear just moments ago was now lost, swallowed up by the vastness of the forest. Her heart began to race as the weight of the situation sank in. She was lost. Completely lost. For a moment she tried to retrace her steps, but the deeper she walked, the more disoriented she became. Her breathing grew faster and the world around her seemed to close in. The sounds of the forest, which had once been calming, now seemed foreboding. The rustling of the leaves, the calls of distant animals, and the chirping of birds were all reminders that she was completely alone. As the daylight began to fade, Emma's sense of urgency grew. She started running, hoping that she would stumble upon a familiar clearing or path that would lead her back. But every direction she took only seemed to get her further from the safety of home. The cold began to settle into her bones, and she could feel the exhaustion creeping up on her. She had no food, no water, and no way of contacting anyone. Her thoughts raced. What if no one even noticed she was missing? What if she was truly alone out here? The tears started to fall then, silent at first, then stronger as her fear took over. She cried for the loneliness she had always felt, for the fear that she might never see anyone again, and for the deep, aching emptiness that she couldn't escape. As Emma wandered deeper into the woods, her heartbeat became louder, almost drowning out the sounds of the forest around her. The panic inside her chest grew stronger with each step she took. She had never imagined that a simple walk would turn into something so terrifying. The path, once clear and familiar, was now swallowed by the dense trees and undergrowth. It felt as though the forest itself was closing in on her, and Emma couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The soft rustle of leaves underfoot was the only sound, and it did little to comfort her. She stopped for a moment, trying to gather her thoughts. Her breath was coming in short, panicked bursts, and her mind raced through every possible scenario. Should she keep going forward or turn back? The idea of turning back seemed pointless now. She didn't know which direction she had come from, and everything in the forest looked the same. The trees were so thick that they blocked out the light, making it difficult to see the sky or even the sun. Emma tried to remember the way she had come. She'd taken the same path countless times before, but now it all seemed unfamiliar. She had always loved the sense of freedom the forest gave her, the sense that she could be alone and peaceful. But now that same forest seemed like a maze that she could never escape. Her feet were sore from walking, and her legs were beginning to feel heavy. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, but she knew that food was the least of her worries. She pulled her jacket tighter around herself, but it did little to stave off the cold that was starting to seep into her bones. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the forest floor. The air grew colder, and Emma felt a chill run through her. She knew that nightfall would come soon, and the thought of being alone in the dark sent a wave of dread through her. As the minutes turned into hours, Emma's hope began to dwindle. She had tried calling for help, but her voice seemed to disappear into the forest, swallowed by the thick canopy of trees above her. There was no response. No one would hear her. The thought of being completely alone with no one to find her was terrifying. She collapsed onto a bed of dry leaves and hugged her knees to her chest, trying to protect herself from the growing cold. The tears that had started as silent sobs now flowed freely down her face.
She felt utterly helpless.
What had started as a peaceful walk had turned into a nightmare. Emma felt as though the forest was mocking her, its silence so deep that it seemed to reflect the emptiness she had felt her whole life. She had always been an outsider, never quite fitting in with the others in the village, but this was different. Here, in the vastness of the woods, she was not just an outsider, she was completely invisible. The thought of her father, back at the farm, brought a small pang of pain to her chest. She knew he hadn't noticed she was gone yet. He was probably busy, focused on the chores that seemed to never end. Emma hadn't been the kind of daughter to ask for much. She never complained, never asked for attention. But now, as she sat alone in the darkening forest, she wished more than anything that he would come looking for her. She wished that someone would care enough to find her. But as the sky darkened, Emma realized that no one was coming. She was on her own, completely alone. The hours dragged on and the night grew colder. Emma tried to sleep, but the ground was hard, and the sounds of the forest kept her awake. The distant hoot of an owl, the rustle of leaves, the occasional snap of a twig, they all seemed so loud in the silence of the night. She thought about her mother, who had passed away when Emma was still a little girl. Her mother had always been the one to comfort her, to hold her close when she felt scared or sad. But now she was gone, and there was no one left to help her. Emma felt a deep, aching loneliness that she had never felt before. As the night wore on, Emma's thoughts became more and more muddled. She couldn't think clearly anymore. The cold was seeping into her body and her stomach was growling from hunger. She closed her eyes, hoping to find some rest, but sleep never came. Instead, her mind raced with fear. What if she couldn't find her way back? What if no one ever came to rescue her? The thought made her heart race even faster, and she opened her eyes again, staring into the darkness. She knew she couldn't stay where she was for long. The forest was a vast place, and she had no way of knowing if she was closer to the edge or deeper into the wilderness. She couldn't just wait around for help to arrive. She had to try. But where should she go? Every direction seemed the same. Every turn led her further into the unknown. The tears started again, hot and salty on her cheeks. She couldn't help it. She was scared. She was tired. And she was so far away from everything she knew. For the first time, Emma began to wonder if she would ever make it out of the forest. The reality of her situation was settling in. She wasn't just lost, she was in danger. There was no one to help her, no one to find her. The loneliness that had always been a part of her life now felt like a heavy weight, pressing down on her chest. She had spent so many years feeling invisible, and now it seemed that she truly was. She sat up, wiping the tears from her face, and took a deep breath. She couldn't give up. She had to keep going. Emma had always been strong, even when the world around her didn't seem to notice. She had faced so much in her life, and this was just another challenge she would have to overcome. She stood up slowly, her legs trembling with weakness, and looked around. The forest was dark, but she couldn't afford to stay still any longer. With one last look at the place where she had spent the night, Emma took a deep breath and began walking again. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew that she couldn't just sit there and wait to be found. She had to find her way out. And so, with determination burning in her chest, she started moving again, the night stretching out ahead of her. This part 2 further develops Emma's emotional struggle and physical hardship in the forest. The reader is drawn into her fear and sense of hopelessness as she faces the harsh realities of being lost. The focus remains on keeping the story engaging while maintaining the emotional depth of the situation. Let me know if you'd like to explore more of the story or revise any part. As Emma continued to walk through the dense forest, her body felt heavier with every step. Her legs ached from the long hours of walking, and her feet were sore, scraped by the rough, uneven ground. She had no idea how long she had been walking or how far she had gone. Time seemed to blur together in the silence of the woods, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant call of a bird. The sun had long since disappeared, and now only the faint light from the stars above guided her way. She had been trying to stay calm, but as the hours dragged on, her thoughts began to spiral. She had always been a quiet, thoughtful girl, but in the isolation of the forest she was left alone with her fears. The weight of being lost in the wilderness pressed down on her, and she couldn't help but wonder if anyone was even searching for her. Was anyone worried about her? She thought about her father, how he must have gone about his day as usual, not even realizing she was gone. Emma had never been the type to ask for attention, but now she couldn't shake the feeling that she had been forgotten. Her stomach growled, a constant reminder of the hunger gnawing at her. She hadn't eaten since the morning before she left, and now the hunger felt sharp and painful. The thought of food was almost unbearable, but she couldn't focus on it for long. Her immediate concern was surviving. She had to keep moving. There was no other choice. But how could she find her way out if she didn't know where she was? The forest, once a place of comfort and peace, had become a maze, its paths disappearing into the thick trees, leaving her with no clear direction. Her breath was coming in short, shallow bursts, and her head began to spin. The effort of walking, of pushing through the physical exhaustion and the growing fear, was wearing her down. She had always been strong, but this was different. She had never faced anything like this before. Every step felt like an eternity, and the more she walked, the more hopeless she felt. Her mind was starting to play tricks on her. She kept seeing things out of the corner of her eye, shadows shifting in the dark, strange shapes in the distance. Every noise seemed amplified in the stillness of the forest. The rustling of leaves became a threat, and every snap of a twig made her heart race. Emma's body felt like it was betraying her. Her legs wobbled and she stumbled more than once, nearly falling to the ground. She wanted to stop, to rest, but she knew she couldn't afford to. If she stopped, if she let herself give up, she might never get back up. So she pushed forward despite the pain, despite the fear, despite the overwhelming urge to just sit down and cry. The wind had picked up, howling through the trees, and the temperature had dropped even further. Emma wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold on to some warmth, but it didn't help much. The cold was biting and relentless. Her breath came out in little puffs of steam, and her teeth started to chatter. She could feel her body growing weaker with every passing minute, but there was no turning back. She couldn't let herself be defeated, not now. Not when she was so close to losing hope. Every few steps she would glance around, searching for any sign of civilization, any sign that someone might be out there looking for her. But the forest seemed endless. The trees towered over her like silent sentinels, and the thick underbrush made it difficult to see much farther than a few feet ahead. She could barely make out the path anymore. It was almost as if the forest had swallowed it up, leaving her with no way to know which direction to go. It was then that the exhaustion began to take a toll on her mind. Her thoughts became jumbled, and she started to question whether she was even going in the right direction anymore. She had stopped trying to keep track of time. All she knew was that she had been walking for what felt like days, and she was no closer to finding her way out. The despair began to creep in again, threatening to swallow her whole. What if she never found her way out? What if she was lost forever? The thought made her chest tighten, and she stopped in her tracks, struggling to breathe through the rising panic. She leaned against a tree, trying to steady herself. The idea of being trapped in the forest with no one to help her was more than she could bear. But she refused to let the fear control her. She had to keep moving. She had to find a way out. With shaky hands, she wiped the sweat and tears from her face, and after a moment she pushed herself back onto her feet. Her legs were trembling, but she kept going. She wasn't sure what drove her anymore. Was it the hope of finding her way back? Or was it the stubbornness to survive no matter what? She wasn't sure, but all she knew was that she couldn't stop, not when there was still a chance. As the night wore on, the forest became even darker. The wind whipped through the trees, and Emma could hear the distant howl of a wolf. It was an eerie sound, one that sent shivers down her spine, but she forced herself to keep moving. She had to stay calm. She had to focus. But the physical and mental strain was starting to get to her. She had no food, no water, and her body was starting to break down. Her stomach felt hollow, her throat dry and scratchy. Her head ached from the constant pressure of her fears. Each step felt like it was draining her energy, but still she kept going. She had no choice. She couldn't give up. Every now and then she would spot a faint glimmer of hope, a distant light, a flicker of something that could be a sign of life. But each time she ran toward it, it would disappear, leaving her feeling even more defeated. The false hope was almost worse than no hope at all. But Emma refused to let it break her spirit. She wasn't ready to give up, not yet. As the night dragged on, Emma's body was on the edge of collapse. She could feel her muscles weakening, her mind becoming foggy. But through the haze of exhaustion and fear, one thing was clear to her. She couldn't stop. She couldn't let herself become another lost soul in the forest. There had to be a way out. There had to be hope. And just as she was about to give in to the darkness, she heard something. A crack of a twig. The sound was faint, but it cut through the silence of the night. Her heart skipped a beat and she froze. Was it someone? Was it a person? Or was it just another trick of her mind? She strained her ears, listening closely. The sound came again. It wasn't in her head. Someone or something was out there. The sound of the twig snapping echoed through the stillness of the night. Emma's heart pounded in her chest, her mind racing as she strained to listen. Was it an animal? Or was it a person? She couldn't be sure. The forest around her was so thick, the trees so dense that it was almost impossible to see anything beyond a few feet ahead. But the sound had been real, unmistakable. It was too clear to ignore. She held her breath and waited, her entire body tense. For a moment there was only silence. The wind rustled through the leaves, and the trees creaked with the weight of the storm that was beginning to roll in. Emma's eyes scanned the darkness, searching for any sign of movement. Her body was exhausted, her muscles sore and stiff from the long hours of walking, but she couldn't allow herself to give in. Not now. Then, just as she was about to turn back and continue walking, she heard it again, the unmistakable snap of a branch underfoot, followed by a soft rustle. This time it was closer. Emma's breath caught in her throat. Her legs felt weak, but she forced herself to take a step forward, hoping to see something, anything, that might give her a clue about what was happening. She moved slowly, cautiously, trying to make as little noise as possible. Every instinct told her to run, to flee back into the forest and escape whatever was out there. But something kept her rooted in place. She had come this far and she wasn't going to back down now. She needed to know. She needed to find out what was out there. For what felt like an eternity, Emma stood frozen in the dark, listening to the subtle sounds of the forest around her. The wind howled through the branches above and the leaves rustled in the trees, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there. The feeling that she wasn't alone, that she hadn't been alone for a long time. And then, just when she thought the night would swallow her whole, a figure appeared out of the darkness. It was tall, with broad shoulders and dressed in a heavy coat that looked weathered and worn from years of use. The figure moved slowly, cautiously, just like Emma had done moments before. But it was not a ghost or a figment of her imagination. It was real, a man, a hunter. For a moment, Emma couldn't believe her eyes. She had been so sure that she was completely alone in the forest, but here, standing before her, was another person. The man paused when he saw her, his eyes narrowing in the dim light. He was older, his face weathered and rough, with a beard that looked like it had grown for weeks without a trim. He didn't seem surprised to see her, though, which confused Emma even more. "Are you lost?" the man asked in a low, gravelly voice. His tone wasn't unkind, but it was distant, as if he had seen this kind of thing before. His eyes scanned her face, noting the exhaustion and fear in her expression. Emma nodded slowly, still too stunned to speak at first. She was too tired to feel anything other than relief. Relief that she wasn't alone, that someone had found her. It was a small comfort, but it was enough to make the tears well up in her eyes. She hadn't realized how badly she had been craving human contact until now. "I didn't mean to get lost," she finally said, her voice shaky. I was walking, and I don't know how I ended up here. I've been walking for hours." The man grunted, but he didn't say anything right away. Instead, he took a step closer to Emma, his eyes scanning the woods around them. His gaze was sharp, like someone who had spent years in the wilderness, relying on his instincts and his knowledge of the land. "You're far from the village," he said, his voice carrying a hint of concern. "This isn't a place for someone like you. You shouldn't be out here alone." Emma swallowed hard, suddenly feeling very small. She had known that she was lost, but hearing it from someone else made the reality of her situation feel even more terrifying. The forest seemed to close in around her, its vastness a reminder of just how far from safety she was. "I didn't know where I was going," Emma admitted. "I was just walking, trying to clear my mind. And then I got lost. I didn't mean to." The man nodded, understanding in his eyes. "It happens," he said. "The woods can be tricky, especially when you're alone. But you're lucky I found you. It's easy to get turned around out here. It's easy to lose your way." Emma felt a mix of gratitude and guilt. She had been so sure that she could handle it on her own, so confident in her ability to survive. But the truth was, she was scared. She had no idea what she would have done if the man hadn't shown up. She wasn't sure if she could have kept going much longer. "Are you going to help me?" Emma asked, her voice filled with uncertainty. She didn't want to ask, but she had no choice. She needed help. She was too exhausted, too lost to keep going by herself. The man seemed to consider her question for a moment. He looked her up and down, then nodded. "I'll help you. But we need to get out of here before the storm hits. It's getting dangerous." Emma didn't need to be told twice. The idea of staying out in the open as a storm approached filled her with dread. She had been through enough already, and she knew that the storm could make everything worse. The man led the way, his movements sure and steady as he navigated the forest with ease. Emma followed closely behind, doing her best to keep up despite her exhaustion. Her body was screaming for rest, but she pushed through it. She had no choice now but to trust him. He was her lifeline, the only thing standing between her and the unknown dangers of the forest. As they walked, the wind began to pick up, and the first few drops of rain hit Emma's skin. The storm was coming fast, and the air felt heavy with the promise of something more. The trees above them swayed in the gusts of wind, and the sky grew darker with each passing minute. But even in the face of the storm, Emma felt a small flicker of hope. She had found someone who could help her, someone who knew how to survive in the wild, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't feel completely alone. The storm had arrived faster than Emma had expected. The once gentle breeze had turned into a fierce wind that howled through the trees, bending them in unnatural angles. The rain followed soon after, falling in heavy sheets that soaked Emma to the bone. Every step she took felt heavier as the mud clung to her boots, making it harder to move. But the man, her rescuer, seemed unaffected by the worsening conditions. He moved with a quiet certainty, each step purposeful, like he had walked through storms like this 100 times before. Emma tried her best to keep up, her legs trembling from exhaustion. She was cold, soaked, and her body ached, but there was something about the man's calm presence that gave her the strength to keep going. For the first time since she had gotten lost, she didn't feel completely alone. In the midst of the storm, his presence felt like a lifeline. He didn't speak much, but every now and then, he would glance back at her to make sure she was still following. His eyes were kind, but there was a certain weariness in them that told Emma he had seen much in his life. They walked in silence, with the storm crashing around them, the only sounds the howling wind and the pattering of rain on the forest floor. The thick trees above them barely offered any protection from the downpour. Emma could feel the cold seeping through her clothes, but she didn't complain. She didn't have the energy for that anymore. She was just focused on putting one foot in front of the other and staying close to the man, hoping that he knew where they were going. It wasn't long before they reached a small clearing, and Emma could finally see the outline of a cabin in the distance. The sight of it made her heart leap with relief. It was small, weathered, but it looked like a safe place, shelter from the storm, warmth and rest. She felt her legs wobble with exhaustion as she walked toward it. The thought of a roof over her head almost too much to bear after everything she had been through. The man opened the door with ease, and Emma stepped inside, gratefully escaping the fierce storm outside. The warmth inside the cabin wrapped around her like a comforting blanket. She didn't even realize how cold she had been until the heat of the cabin hit her skin. She could feel the tension leaving her body as she stepped further inside, taking in the simple, rustic interior. The cabin was small but functional, with a small fire burning in the corner of the room, casting a warm glow on the wooden walls. There were blankets strewn about and a table in the center, cluttered with hunting tools and other supplies. The man didn't say anything at first. He simply moved to the fire and began adding logs to it, making sure the flames grew higher. Emma stood by the door for a moment, letting the warmth sink into her bones. Her clothes clung to her skin, wet and uncomfortable, but she didn't care. She was safe now, at least for tonight. "Sit down," the man finally said, his voice softer now. "You look like you're about to collapse." Emma nodded, her legs giving way as she moved to the small wooden chair by the fire. She sank into it, her muscles finally giving up the fight. Her body screamed in protest from the strain, but she was too tired to care. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the warmth from the fire fill her chest, feeling the relief wash over her like a tidal wave. She hadn't realized just how much she had been holding in until now, and now, in the safety of the cabin, she let herself feel everything. Her eyes fluttered open when she heard movement. The man had returned with a blanket, which he draped over her shoulders. It was rough but warm. She wrapped it around herself tightly, the fabric scratchy against her skin but comforting in its simplicity. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice soft from the exhaustion that had settled over her. The man nodded. "You'll need to rest. You've been through a lot, and it's not safe to keep going in this weather." Emma wasn't sure how to respond. She had so many questions. Who was this man? Why had he been out in the woods at the same time she was? Why had he helped her when he didn't have to? But she didn't ask. She didn't need to know the answers. For the first time in a long while, she simply wanted to rest. She didn't want to think, to question, or to worry. She just needed to heal. The man stood back, giving her space as he began to prepare something near the fire. It wasn't long before a faint, pleasant smell began to fill the cabin, something warm and earthy. Emma's stomach growled in response, the hunger she had been ignoring finally making itself known. She had been so caught up in the storm, in her survival, that she hadn't even realized how hungry she was. The man noticed her reaction and chuckled softly. "Don't worry, there's food," he said, reaching into a small pot near the fire and ladling out a thick, hearty soup. The smell made Emma's mouth water, and she couldn't help but feel a surge of gratitude toward him. He handed her a wooden spoon and she took it, her hands trembling slightly. "Thank you," she said again, her voice hoarse. The soup was warm and comforting, filled with vegetables and meat that tasted like nothing she had eaten before. It was simple, but it was exactly what she needed. Each bite seemed to restore a small piece of her strength, and she realized just how much she had been holding back from herself, how much she had been trying to survive alone. For the first time in what felt like forever, Emma allowed herself to simply be. She didn't have to hide behind her pride or her fears. She didn't have to pretend to be strong. She could let someone else take care of her for once, and it felt good. It felt right. After a while, the man settled down on the other side of the room near the fire. Emma finished her soup, the warmth and nourishment filling her up in ways she hadn't expected. Her mind, though tired, started to calm. The fire crackled, the storm raged outside, but inside there was only quiet. She felt safe. For the first time since she had wandered into the woods, she wasn't afraid. The man didn't speak much after that. He seemed content to let her rest. Emma could feel her eyelids growing heavy, the warmth of the fire lulling her into a state of peaceful drowsiness. She was safe. She was no longer lost, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to sleep, letting the darkness of the cabin wrap around her like a blanket, just as the storm outside did with the trees.